All right, hello everyone. My name is Mrs. Richardson, and I am coming to you from a time in the past via recording. So Mrs. Shroga asked me, she reached out to me this past week and asked if I'd be willing to teach or record a mini lesson on some history, specifically about World War II. And I told her I'd love to do that since, funny enough, my junior level high school U.S. history class uh, just just finished studying World War II ourselves. So this is all fresh in my brain, actually. And she mentioned that you guys would be reading The Boy in the Striped Pajamas soon. And so some context for what takes place in that novel would be helpful. And again, funny enough, we just finished watching this film and studying its contents in U.S. history class as well. So I posted a photo of myself here. I love to knit. I love warm hats. I like to stay warm. I'm not a fan of the cold. And I teach U.S. history and personal finance and two different psychology elective classes in high school. So hopefully you guys will hang around me long enough that I'll get to see you in one of the high school classes. So I'm sorry I couldn't be there in person today. That's what I would have preferred to do because I love talking to all of the students. But unfortunately, your English class is the exact same time as my live US history class. So I was double booked. So today I'm going to give you guys a mini lesson on some of the events leading up to and happening during World War II, which is when The Boy in the Striped Pajamas film and novel, of course, take place. So we're going to talk a little bit about what was happening in America, a little bit of what was happening worldwide, and we're going to spend a brief minute just specifically defining what the Holocaust was. And hopefully that will give you guys some good context as you go through your novel. So I want to go ahead. I've got a few slides here, and then I've sent Miss Stroka some videos as well. Okay, so by the time we get to the year 1940 in U.S. history, World War II is fully happening, but America as a country was not yet involved. The current president was Franklin Delano Roosevelt. You may have heard of. He was our president for more terms than anyone else, and so he ran for a re-election sort of in the middle of the Great Depression before World War II had started. And so when he was reelected in 1936, people were focused on the Great Depression and how to get the economy in the United States and also in Europe back up and running, because a depression in the United States uh, contributed to a depression in European economies as well. And that's important to make note of because Hitler actually knew that that was happening and sort of took advantage of that distraction on the part of European countries, but we'll get to that in a few minutes. So FDR is reelected in 1936. He's focused on the Great Depression. By the time he runs for reelection in 1940, only 4 years later, a huge portion of Europe and Asia is engulfed in a Second World War. And there was a lot of leftover emotions, worries, fears, tensions from the First World War. These two world wars were very close together, and World War I was still pretty fresh in the minds of many Americans, as well as the American government, by the time we got to World War II. So Americans were concerned by the time we get to 1940 that World War II would actually end up being fought partially on American soil. And so people went to the polls thinking about military attacks and invasions, choosing their president and in how they were going to make their voting decisions, rather than unemployment or bank failures on their mind, which is what they had been thinking about the previous election. So that's sort of the introductory. So this graphic here kind of gives you an idea of the results of the election of 1940. President Franklin Roosevelt was the Democratic candidate, and he won by pretty much a landslide. And so we're going to take a look at some of the things that he did to support the war effort, and of course, we eventually did get involved. So, a brief history here. Why did World War II happen at all? Now, of course, there's a variety of complicated reasons for this, and I'm going to sort of give you the short version. So, World War II happened in part because of the Great Depression. It happened in part because of World War I, and it happened in part because of the German leaders and other Asian leaders as well. So, during the Great Depression, the American government focused on using its democratic powers to fight the negative consequences of the Great Depression. And the Great Depression actually spread to other countries and really started destroying the economies of European countries because those economies had yet to recover from World War I, which had been fought in their backyard. So, as Americans and the American president was using democratic powers to fight the Great Depression, European and Asian leaders were being overthrown by fascist leaders. And if you're not sure what a fascist leader is, right, the definition of fascism is right down here, okay? So it's a way of organizing a society in which a government ruled by a dictator controls the lives of the people, and in which the people are not allowed to disagree with the government. And then down here at the bottom, very harsh control or authority, okay? So fascist governments are dictatorships, which I'm going to assume as a class you guys are probably familiar with. If you're not, then ask your teacher. So the Italian Fascist Party was the first to take over in Europe in as early as 1922, even before the Depression began. But by the mid-1930s, leading right up to World War II, multiple fascist governments had taken over in other nations as well, including, of course, as we probably know, the country of Germany. The German Fascist Party was called the Nazi Party, all right, and this is where we get the term the Nazis from. Okay, so German fascists were called the Nazis. The Nazis took power in Germany in 1933 when the leader of their party, Adolf Hitler, was appointed as Chancellor of Germany and then became the dictator of Germany. Okay, so you now have Hitler in control, right? He's a dictator ruling the German government, controlling, like we see down here again, controlling the lives of the people, and in which people are not allowed to disagree with the government, in this case, him. All right, you were not allowed to disagree with Hitler. Now, of course, how did this end up affecting the whole world, right? Dictatorships are not something that people generally like, to put it in a sort of a simple way. But who knows what might have happened had Hitler sort of stayed within his own country. But he didn't. One of his major goals was to acquire more territory and expand the amount of people and regions that he was in control of. And so we'll see as we start looking at the war in more detail, depending on which additional videos your teacher decides to show you, you'll sort of see how Germany just started invading country after country after country. And went quite not necessarily unnoticed, but no one was trying to stop Hitler from invading country after country until it reached a certain point. So we'll get to that in a couple minutes. Okay, so who were on the two sides of World War II here? Okay, you may have heard of this. You had the Axis powers and you had the Allies. All right, or the Allied powers, depending on how you want to say it. So the three main fascist nations, again, dictatorships, okay, were Germany, Italy, and Japan. And they all sort of became fascist around the same time-ish. Again, we're talking within a decade or so. And they all had goals of creating new empires by, as fast as possible, invading and taking over other nations. Italy focused on one region, Germany focused on another region, and Japan focused on, again, the region closest to it. They also knew, these three countries, that the nations most likely to stop them from invading these countries, meaning the United States, Great Britain, and France, were too busy focusing on battling the Great Depression. to pay much attention to what these three fascist countries were doing at first. All right. So let's keep moving forward. All right. So Germany, Italy, and Japan, originally, these countries were not exactly friends. They, in fact, fought each other quite a bit. But as they got to the 1930s and they realized that they were the three main fascist countries, the fascist powers, they decided to make a pact called the Tripartite Pact. Okay? And basically, the goal was that they would not stop each other from invading other countries. They didn't exactly make a pact to help each other, but they kind of made a pact to not fight each other. And this alone was powerful because these countries were known to fight each other. They weren't natural allies, they weren't natural friends. Germany and Italy didn't really care about Japan's quest for empire in the Asia region. Japan was not affected by Germany and Italy's quest for empire or power in Europe. Germany and Italy were actually rivals for power because they were sort of fighting around the same areas in Europe, the same territory, but they did get together and make the pact. So this pact was made in the end of September 1940. And basically it said that they would stand by and cooperate with one another in their purpose to establish a new order of things. All right? So basically, in other words, each nation will let the others take over whatever countries they want without stopping them. Okay? So they were sort of mutually brought together by their similarly run governments and goals. All right, let's keep moving forward. All right, so what was America doing during the beginning of the war? And again, I'm going to try to summarize this as quickly as I can. So the United States did not join World War II until we were multiple years into the war. And that was for several reasons. Number one, like I said, America was a bit burned from World War I and was trying to stay out of European affairs. However, one thing happened that started to change our minds. And again, I could spend 2 hours on this. But basically, Germany invaded, like I said, multiple countries. Well, they invaded a particular country that Great Britain or England was aligned with and had promised to protect. And as soon as Germany invaded that specific country, England or Great Britain declared war against Germany. And this was important to America because America and Great Britain were allies and they supported each other in their various war efforts. So America was then sort of divided. Do we support Great Britain in this war against Germany? Do we mind our own business? What do we do? And so we were sort of undecided until we reached the Pearl Harbor attack. And unfortunately, I don't have a full slide on that because, again, for the sake of time. Okay, but basically what happened is the fascist country of Japan bombed and attacked the United States Navy in Pearl Harbor and killed several thousand Navy members and destroyed a huge portion of the U.S. Navy's ships. And so with this direct attack from Japan to the United States made the decision to get involved in World War II on the side of the Allies, which included Great Britain and other countries as well. I'll get to that in a couple of minutes. So that's how we got involved. All right. So let's see. Here we go. Okay. So who were the initial main allied nations? So we know that Great Britain was fighting against Germany. France joined Great Britain in the fight against Germany. And this was after Germany invaded Poland. And then, even though Poland was quickly taken over by the Nazi Party, the members of Poland's government fled to Great Britain and represented their country there safely in Great Britain. So Great Britain or England, France, Poland, and then eventually the United States all fought against Italy, Germany, and Japan. Okay, so that sort of gives you guys a layout of the war and sort of what was going on at the time. So the next thing that I want to focus on is the Holocaust, and I'm not going to go into tons of detail. Again, it depends on how much time Ms. Shroka wants to spend on things, because I use a lot of videos in my class. So you guys are probably familiar with what the Holocaust was, but for anyone who needs a refresher or maybe a little bit unsure, the Holocaust is the term for what happened during World War II. And basically, the Holocaust was the systematic, okay, so we're talking organized, state sponsored, that means governments were behind it, killing of 6 million Jewish men, women, and children, and millions of others, specifically by Nazi Germany and its allies and collaborators during World War II. Okay, so understanding the Holocaust and what was happening to the Jewish people at the time and who was doing it will be relevant to reading your novel. Okay, now the Germans called the Holocaust, what we call the Holocaust, the Germans called this, quote, the final solution to the Jewish question. And so I have the video link here. I'm going to leave that up to Ms. Schroeder how much she wants to include or not include. That kind of, it follows the development of how the Nazi Party got to the point where they decided to try to eliminate an entire race of people. Because there's no evidence that it necessarily started out that way. But as the war progressed, it became clear that that was the goal. Okay. And I also want to make a note, again, just to point out that it was not only Jewish, it was the majority of people murdered during the Holocaust were Jewish men, women, and children. But it also included other minority groups that did not fit the Nazi ideal of what race should look like. So this included many gypsies. It included anyone potentially who disagreed with Nazi beliefs. So remember, in a dictatorship, right, in a fascist dictatorship, the government controls everything, or the dictator controls everything and suppresses or stops anybody who disagrees with them. There were plenty of people in Germany during World War II who did not agree with Nazi policies or what was happening, but they were pretty quickly silenced. Many were executed, many were put in jail, many were banned from the country, and many were also sent to the concentration camps, right, which were the work camps that the Jewish men, women, and children were sent to under the false belief that they were being put in this work camp during the period of the war and then would be sent home when the war was over. So I'm going to leave it at that. Hopefully, Ms. Shroga, that gives some good context. And I will send you several other videos. You can choose if you want to add to it or not. I hope you guys enjoy the novel. It's an excellent book. I love that it kind of tells about a really horrible period in history through the innocence of a child's eyes, and sort of his innocence kind of slowly fading away a little bit, being stripped away a little bit as he starts to figure out a little bit about what's happening. So, all right, yeah, that's all I have. I didn't want to talk for 40 minutes. Hopefully this was helpful to you guys, and have a fabulous time reading your book. Hopefully I will see you, wink wink, in a high school class one day. Thanks, everybody.